Hi, folks. I'm Dan McDermott. We've all heard the story about the blind Chinese dissident currently holed up in the United States Embassy in Beijing at an awkward time as two top officials from the United States are en route or have arrived. I'm not sure which. But I want to discuss this with someone who's very familiar with the story. I'd like to bring in Bob Fu to talk about Chen Guangcheng. And welcome, Bob. Thank you so much. Bob is with ChinaAid.org.
Thank you, Dan, for having me.
So, Bob, I guess I know you've been busy telling this story, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions about this story. First of all, we understand that he is in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing and that he's safe now.
Yes, he's in the U.S. Embassy since April 26th, and he's very safe. And hopefully, he eats some American hamburgers there.
Awesome. Now, I want to ask you his. I was familiar not with his name, and I didn't put two and two together. But like most Americans, I was familiar with his previous work, which was exposing, I guess, forced abortions as part of China's one-child policy. And then when I heard about a blind dissident, I didn't correlate the two. And now, of course, we're more familiar with this story. Can you tell us? I guess he's a real thorn in the side of that regime, and tell us what motivates him and how he got started, and just kind of a brief on his story.
Yes, Chen became blind when he was a child because of fever, and he was literally illiterate actually when he was until 20 years old. And he became a self-taught lawyer. He just fell in love with the law and just start providing legal advice to his fellow villagers and who met some, the law violators officials. And then in 2005, he found there has been massive violation of citizens' rights and in the name of one-child policy in his city of Linyi. And so he and fellow other human rights lawyers started to document with interviews of over 100,000 cases of victims of the forced abortion and forced sterilization, and because of this brutal one-child policy in in China, and for that, it angered the Chinese authority, obviously, and in fact, the central government actually fired the head of the so-called Family Planning Commission of his city in the beginning. But of course, the government still took revenge, and he was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months for two trumpeted charges of damaging public property and blocking traffic or something like that for 4 years and 3 months. In September 2010, after he was released from a full term of imprisonment, he was immediately transferred back to his village, and he and his wife and their daughter, young daughter, and his mom had been under house arrest since then, and they had been experiencing tremendous torture and mistreatment for the past 19 months.
And
Until
so,
April, yeah, sorry.
in so many ways, China is a very, very modern country, technologically, and especially in the city centers, some of the provinces. In many other ways, it's almost like a medieval dictatorship, and you see both sides. So I guess the folks there, I mean, was there not an awareness of the forced sterilizations or abortions, or was it they just didn't realize how common it was until Mr. Chen spoke up about it and raised a fuss?
Well, actually, that's a forced abortion and forced sterilization issue had been widely spread all over China. It was really just Chen's city carried out that policy, maybe more brutal, according to Chen's perspective, and he just wanted to expose them and filed a class action against those officials. And every day, Dan, today, every given day, the 20 some thousand of babies were forced aborted just because of this one-child policy. And so it is a brutal policy, and I think Chen, for exposing that, had paid a heavy price with his family members until, of course, April 22nd, he was able to escape from his house.
A lot of folks may think that some supporters showed up, put him in the trunk of a car, and got him out of there. It wasn't anything like that. This is the most incredible part of this story is how he ended up from his house arrest into the U.S. Embassy. Can you tell us how that happened?
Yes, I mean, first of all, a disclaimer. I mean, as far as I know, that I think I have the close knowledge that there's no international conspiracy, and there's no, Chinese conspiracy try to coincide the secretary visit or bilateral talks between U.S. and China. And Chen just was able to really miraculously made it. And obviously, in any given day, 360 days, his house has been surrounded with nearly 100 security guards and government hired thugs, and nobody's able to come too close. Even the CNN crew and the famous Batman Christian Bale tried to visit Chen, but were repelled. On the facing the camera, and was almost stoned. And so there, he basically Chen made a plan, and planned this for months, and he pretended to be laying on bed and could not move out of his home, and for months he wants to elude the guards, and also observe the pattern of those guards, and when they get water, when they take some short break, within 10 seconds, I was told he was able to slip into another room, and then quickly he was able to climb a wall from around his compound, and he then crossed a river, and use his super sensitive ears to avoid all these guards, and walk in the little road on the field, and walking hours and hours until he reached to a safe destination, to alert some of the friends who picked him up later on and drove him to Beijing, where he was hiding for 3 days until he was handed over to the U.S. Diplomatic protection on April 26th.
How much of this do you think was obviously it's made him a worldwide household name, which he wasn't before. His deeds were known, but he wasn't something everyone was talking about, and I guess that was the point. And so you're saying that it wasn't in fact timed to coincide with the visit by Secretary of State Clinton and Treasury Secretary Geithner.
That's right. Nobody has planned that. At least, from Chen. He was cut off with outside communication totally in the past 7 years, and from those friends who picked him up was not had much pre-knowledge that he was about to escape on that night on April 22nd.
Okay, so he's safe now. What's your best guess, knowing some Chinese officials and the culture? What's your best guess? What is going on now? I imagine I imagine the ambassador was probably called in for an awkward confrontation with the folks in Beijing. What's your analysis of the political situation right now?
My analysis is from both sides of my knowledge on the U.S. and Chinese government, that both sides have been engaging very intensive diplomatic negotiations to find a solution, a viable solution that respect Chen's wishes and his safety, and also his family members' safety and freedom. And I think the most realistic and viable option is for Chen and his family and just to come to the U.S. For medical treatment as visitors, and to live some peaceful life. And I think It's hard to imagine, the Obama administration will hand it him over to Chinese security forces, and with some sort of kind of promise from any Chinese leaders, given the past 7 years disastrous and brutal treatment against him and his family.
Tell me, I guess the state media has not acknowledged that this has occurred, but there are all sorts of ways that information finds its way, even in a society like China. I mean, this is not North Korea we're talking about. So tell me, how widespread is knowledge of the situation, probably? How widespread is knowledge of Mr. Chang in China?
I mean, Mr. Chen has been a very well-known figure among the, many Chinese, vulnerable people and human rights defenders and freedom fighters, and millions of petitioners know about him. And of course, as you know, that the state-owned media and has been silent, and now even Chen's name and his initials have been censored on any given media, online, or on paper. I mean, nothing you can find anything about him. But I think U.S. I should, we should be proud of our current Ambassador Gary Locke. I think this is a courageous decision for him to basically protect Mr. Chen at this very sensitive, critical moment in U.S.-China relations.
Yeah, I think they had a situation the second he showed up. What do you do? Even, I'm sure calls were made to Washington. What do we do? And even at that point, it was awkward. And I mean, behind this, really both sides are. Is there any reaction from China yet publicly? I mean, I know not on the state TV, but I think the State Department has been coy on our side. Is there a reaction publicly from, I mean, are they outraged? Are they keeping quiet and everyone's trying to figure out what on earth do we do because we want to preserve this relationship? And then I'll go to Harold next.
They're pretty much keeping their lip tight, and I think pretty much the Chinese government is silenced on this issue. But behind the scenes, I know from my sources that the top Chinese leaders had been deliberating for a solution for Chen's case, and hopefully, something, some kind of framework could come very soon.
Okay, I have a million more questions, but let's go to the room here. Let's start with Harold, and then we'll go to Sheila, and then Bruce. Harold, do you have a question? This is again, we're speaking with Bob Fu, who is the founder of ChinaAid.org, and we're speaking about the blind dissident who's currently has escaped to the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. So, Harold, unmute your mic if it's muted, and then fire away.
Yes, our Secretary of State in the State Department says they can't confirm or deny that he is in the embassy. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, that's a very diplomatic language, seeing, I don't want to talk about it, right? And but she has been, one of the outspoken advocate for Chen. I mean, as late as last November, she still mentioned Chen's name and urged China to free Chen and his family. So, of course, on the eve of her, arrival to Beijing for these high-level talks, obviously she cares about the feeling of the Communist Party leaders, and without, mentioning even Chen's name. But everybody knows Chen is in her ambassador's hands.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
Sheila, you want to unmute your mic, and do you have a question for Bob Fu from ChinaAid.org?
Yes, thank you so much for this story. It's blown way out, and I'm so appreciative. I saw the interview you did with Brent Cannon on NBC Bay Area, so and I'm glad. Yeah, and I'm really hoping that his family is safe, and I'm hoping for good things. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your care.
Bruce, do you have a question for Bob Fu?
Bob, it's a real privilege and honor to be able to speak with you. And Dan, I'm really excited that you've been able to have this interview. When you were discussing earlier, and I was listening before joining the hangout about the details, as at least as much as you know of them, of his escape, it seemed that in many ways, I guess I would use the word providential in how he
Yes, it
was
is.
able to get out of there. You know, from my perspective, as a man of faith, I've been a pastor for 35 years. I know that many people have been also much in prayer for
Mm,
this dear
yes.
man and his family. Just as an observation on your part, when you think about the providential nature of that, are there those in your country that have been praying as well for his safety? And would you see some element of, shall we say, divine intervention in his escape?
Oh, absolutely, Bruce. And I mean, I got because we are with a leading organization helping campaign for trans freedom and his family's protection over the years in the international arena. And many Chinese church, especially how independent, persecuted church leaders and believers had been praying for Chan, his family. And I even got a phone call from a major house church leader who himself was brutally persecuted, with like 50 times arrest. And he called me this morning and said he's heading to Chan's village and to pray for Chan and to help, Chan's family. I mean, Chan by far is not a Christian, and but he shows the courage for justice and love for those defenseless. And so he's our hero, and we certainly should pray that the U.S. Will make a right diplomatic decision and to let his family come to the U.S. To spend some time for a rest.
Thanks. That's an amazing story, and it is great that it takes everybody doing their part to bring about a good solution to this. Not just people of faith, but people in government who will hopefully make decisions based upon what is best for he and his family, and not just make a politically expedient decision. So thank you for all
That's
your hard
right.
work.
It's a miracle. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, in just a moment, I'll ask Gary if he has a question, and then Linda, and then Oleg. So Gary, if you want to get ready, but if anyone for the folks watching on YouTube or Google Plus or Justin, I'm not sure about the Justin chat. I'm not looking at that. I apologize. It's just too many things to look at. But we're watching the comments on YouTube. If you have a question or comment, please ask it, and we'll forward it to Mr. Fu. We've got about, I think, 10 more minutes, and he's got his other interviews. So, Gary, did you have a question for Bob Fu from ChinaAid.org?
Yes, Dan, thanks very much for inviting me in this morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Gary.
Bruce, good to see you this morning. Dan, thank you for being here. This is more of a commentary than a question. It's sort of interesting how this is being played very close to the vest. No one's making any inflammatory statements. And basically, he is a fellow who doesn't like what's going on in China, does not want to leave, but has placed himself in the position where he has some bargaining power, perhaps, to bring the world's attention to what he wants to do. And it doesn't sound to me like the Chinese want to lose out on this chance to more or less integrate their attitudes with the rest of the world and pay attention to this man's personal desires, especially as it would benefit China as a whole. So it seems to me that things really are changing in China. And I think if we handle this correctly, I think we're going to see great progress from this event. Don't you?
Well, I mean, yes, if it's handled properly, and I mean, basically, the best scenario, if the Chinese leaders wants to use this occasion to really carry out the rule of law and protection of the citizens' basic rights. I mean, if you have watched the Chan's video he released, recorded right after his escape for 15 minutes. I mean, if you don't just go to ChinaAid.org, you can view it. I mean, he was making a direct appeal to the Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao and basically asking three very fundamental basic requests for, hold those officials accountable who abuse his family and protect his family safety and really take justice for into justice for those corrupted officials who use Chen as a money-making mechanism. And I think even the Chinese premier have said similar language in the past. So I mean, if the Chinese can capture this moment, certainly it will be a transforming moment for Chinese society. But I doubt about that because last year, was the worst human rights year in China by all account, and in 2 decades. And there are more human rights defenders and lawyers were kidnapped and tortured right after that Jasmine Revolution time, and more religious prisoners. I mean, we have documented numerous human rights. I mean, Christian pastors and believers were rounded up and arrested and detained. And this year, they already issued a secret document, to have a 10-year plan to eradicate the whole independent Christian house church movement with 80 million people over there. And I think the only viable option is for Chen to come to the U.S. With both sides saving face, and for Chen to get some rest and safety.
Well, from what I've been reading, he's not making a big deal about coming to the U.S. He said that he really wants to remain in China. And maybe we're being naive about this, and certainly the human rights record for China is pretty abysmal. But he basically in China, is he well known as a dissident or an advocate?
He's well known as a legal advocate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go to Linda. We've got just a couple more minutes. Linda, did you have a question for Bob Fu from ChinaAid.org?
Yes, first of all, it's a pleasure to be able to interact with you. I've interacted with many, must be dozens of people, most of whom are students that get, to come here. But I go to China 3 or 4 times a year. I'm going to be making a movie. I want to address the milk issues that I've heard from many people, and also Weiwei, what's going on.
Yeah.
If you know the artist of Weiwei, he's a really good friend of a friend of mine that I haven't talked to in a couple of months. But we were supposed to go there and meet him at one point. And I'm worried about the people there, that they just don't seem to protect, the general public. And is it, that's mostly what I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Sort of clarify that, the report about Chen does not want to leave China. Just remember, he made that point right after he escaped from his house. A man who has been cut out of communication from outside world pretty much in the past 7 years. He was not aware what's happening in China, and to especially last year's brutal cracking down. And he, of course, certainly didn't want to leave his 2 children, his wife, and behind by leaving China alone. So I think that's the context. And by the end of the day, if he has to face the choice of the safety of his family and his desire to practice law in China for legal defense, he has to. I think he will, in the end, as a friend. I know he will make the right choice.
Let me bring in Oleg, and we've just got a few moments left. Oleg, tell Bob Fu a little bit about your background, and go ahead and ask a question.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Fu. Pleasure to talk to you. I'm from the former Soviet Union, and basically understand some of the laws and things like that probably a little bit more than most Americans do, because it was very similar where I came from. But what I wanted to ask you was, do you think if the gentleman decides to leave to go to the U.S., do you think that's going to spark a major national incident between China and U.S. if that's the case? And will he be able to actually accomplish that, considering the fact that he's still in China?
No, I don't think it will make any major diplomatic frictions between the U.S. and China if he chose to live with his family just to seek medical treatment. What he only needs is the Chinese government cooperation to issue 5 passports for himself and his family, and the U.S. just issue his tourist, business visa to come for travel, to the U.S. He and his wife were in Washington D.C. for a year as exchange scholar in 2003, and so there has been precedents. It's not only one precedent, a number of precedents that this kind of a medical treatment deal had been done in the past. And Chen, remember, Chen is not a criminal. He's not a fugitive. He's not indicted for anything. So legally, he's a free man. He's a Chinese, just normal citizen, going to the embassy to apply passports. Apply visa. Of course, that needs some diplomatic negotiation or, back the door to sort of, find a way the Chinese government can give these passports.
I have one last question, and then I'll end the recording, and then we can say our thank yous and all that. But I'm just curious, what we've heard on a totally different subject. Obviously, we're worried about Mr. Chen, but just as a U.S.-Chinese, we dance this economic, political tightrope. I remember watching the Tiananmen Square situation and the aftermath of that, and there was a discussion about most favored nation trade status and that sort of thing. Our economic relationship has only grown stronger, and you can't hardly buy anything that's not made in China in this country. So, what are your thoughts on like the Foxconn controversy with Apple? And on the one hand, they're describing suicide nets, and then there was that discredited report, and then on the other hand, there's a line wrapped around the building to get a job there. So, coming from China and watching this controversy, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think Apple got a bum rap, or do you think it's an important thing to be highlighted, or just in general, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in the past 20 years of the engagement with China by the U.S., I think there was. I'm not advocating for isolation or cut off business relations, but I think there has been a grave mistake, that was made. The equation or proposition was suggesting that more trade, more economic, activities will inevitably create a middle class, and more democracy and freedom will happen. But by all accounts, even the State Department own human rights report and congressional reports, European reports shows yes, the human rights has been deteriorating. I think partially, the business only approach has failed, and I think that certainly even indirectly emboldened the regime. Now is I think most of the world powers has lost leverage to help China improve human rights. And on the China side, I think this kind of so-called China model, just economic growth alone, and with whatever price is paid, I think it's not sustainable. I think as a Time magazine article recently claimed, it's almost, it's broken. It's bankrupted, and I think it's time to reconsider, at least for the business leaders, to find a real balance that when they engage China, human rights should be a component by all sectors, economic, education exchange with China. Everybody has to talk about the fundamental, protection of human rights and religious freedom and other freedoms, like Chen had experienced.
Bob Fu is the founder of ChinaAid.org, and this is Bob Fu's first ever Google Plus Hangout, and I hope you enjoyed
Yeah, I really
being
enjoyed
here.
it. Thank you so much.
This was fantastic. It was great. I want to thank the panel, the folks watching, and this was wonderful. So stick around for 1 sec, and let me just say thanks so much to all the folks who watched, and we'll be back with more news anytime. Thanks.